Hello and welcome to Spaced Out. I'm Sarah Begum, and today we're going to focus on space mining.
Like the universe, the space industry is expanding, and with major developments in space activities, we can expect to be a species no longer earthbound. New space ventures have their sights set on mining the metals, minerals, and energy sources that exist in our solar system and beyond. Yes, space mining will be the next cash cow in orbit. My guest today is Daniel Faber. He is a serial entrepreneur in the aerospace and mining industries. He is the CEO of Orbit Fab, a company that builds and operates gas stations in space to refuel satellites and make the space industry more sustainable.
Gosh, I can mine your brain, You're going to be mining asteroids, and right now in this hour, I'm going to be mining your brain. So, how did it all start, Daniel?
Thanks, Sarah. I hope I can live up to that introduction. How did it all start? I guess I decided to start looking at asteroid mining and working in the space industry when I was in first year undergraduate at university. I wanted to do something interesting and I wanted to do something useful for humanity. But because I'd learned how to integrate, I realized that existential risks were some of the most important things we could work on. But if humanity goes away, that would be a terrible thing. So I looked at that and realized if we get people off Earth, we'll address a whole bunch of existential risks. And so that was sort of the impetus for starting to think about how to build an economy in space, how to create the first permanent jobs in space, and then create industries that would have more and more people living off Earth. And so I wrote down a list of the industries that I thought could pay for that first permanent job in space. And it was only two things, tourism and mining. And I couldn't see myself as a tour operator, so I decided I'd start working on asteroid mining. And 25 years later, we're still not yet there yet, but we're getting there.
So, what stage are you currently at?
Well, how would you define stages? It's been an interesting journey. I started out getting an engineering degree and learning how to build spacecraft, so I'm working on the technical side of things. But I'd realized already that nobody else was starting these businesses in a way that I thought was going to work. So I just had to also learn how to start companies, which is why I then ended up becoming a serial entrepreneur. So the companies that I started were all sort of around that theme of asteroid mining. How do we get to that point? So the first company was an instrumentation company developing instruments for the terrestrial mining industry to measure the content of their rocks. And after that, I worked on a company to develop communication systems for satellites in Earth orbit to communicate with the ground, to provide high-speed internet for Antarctica, actually. And so we built a communication system that was very small, very compact, for very small satellites, which is exactly what you need if you want to prospect asteroids. You need a very small, light, high-bandwidth communication system. And so that was sort of the second business. But then most recently, I was CEO of Deep Space Industries, where we had the big, hairy, audacious goal of asteroid mining, but we realized that we had to do that in steps as well. So what we started as the real core business there was building a thruster, a small little rocket to move satellites around while they're in orbit. But that thruster ran off propellants that we could get from an asteroid. So we built the thruster, which was to build demand for things that we could one day get from an asteroid. And now at Orbit Fab, we're building the propellant supply chain in orbit. We're building gas stations in space. We are launching the first gas station in space in about 2 months' time. We are that close to it.
Oh, that's so exciting!
Yeah, so this is step two, right? Now we're making a market for the propellant in space that one day we can get from an asteroid. So I hope one day that we can put a purchase order with an asteroid mining company to buy the water and hydrocarbons that they can get out of an asteroid cheaper than what we could launch it in a rocket off the ground. So that's the step that we're in right now. There's like 4 or 5 other steps, each of which will be big companies in their own right that we have to overcome for the materials processing and the transport and all these types of things before we can get to asteroid mining.
What is the major challenge you're experiencing now, and how do you plan to overcome it?
Gosh, the major challenge. When I look at asteroid mining, there are 5 big challenges. One is there isn't a market yet for the material that's in the asteroids. if you try and bring the metals to the ground, you compete against all the other mining companies on the ground that don't have to launch rockets and satellites and all those complex things. So it's very hard to compete. But selling fuel and material in space is actually a much more attractive market to start with. But it doesn't exist yet. We have to build the market. So I think the biggest problem is this market risk, which is why I'm building Orbit Fab as a company, to create that market. But there's also geology risk. We don't know actually what the minerals and the rock mechanics and things in the asteroid. There's technology risk. We don't have the technology to extract that material in the low gravity environment with that mineralogy. We also don't have a good legal system. We don't know what the tax rate is and which court to go to if there's a dispute. In the mining industry, they call that country risk. So there's a lot of country risk that is just unknown. And then there's financing risk. This will take a lot of money. Can we raise that money? No one will give a small check if they think that you'll never actually raise the larger check. So there's all of these risk areas that play together to make it a hard thing to do.
So what factors could contribute to the confidence in other players or investors who could work with you to achieve your goal?
So the most important thing really is customers. When you talk to investors, the thing they care about is that you can make money, that people will pay you to buy whatever you're trying to make. And so that's the thing to work on. If we're looking to sell propellants, if we're looking to sell the water and the hydrocarbons turned into things that can make rockets go, then the investors want to see that people are buying that. They're buying it in the form that you're trying to sell it. They're buying it where you want to sell it. They're paying the kinds of prices that will allow you to make a profit. Those are the types of things that matter most. If there's a big enough pain point, there's a big enough problem to be solved, and it creates enough value to have that problem solved, then it's worth investing in to solve it. Because then, once you've solved it, people will pay you for it.
Okay, so this is interesting because asteroids have all kinds of minerals and materials within them. I'm interested to know, what are the minerals that you're hoping to find, and what are you hoping to do with that?
Yeah, we did a bunch of economic analysis before we set up Deep Space Industries, and I'd done some, and there are a lot of really bright people who came together to start that up. And what we concluded before we even started the company was that bringing metal back to Earth wasn't actually a big enough problem. It wasn't a big enough problem to justify the investment that we were going to need to mine asteroids. And we looked at lots of interesting things, and we looked at platinum and the rare earth elements, which are worth a lot per gram, but the rare earth elements, there's not a huge amount of demand. So if you brought back enough material to pay for the mining operation, you would actually have so much material trying to sell into the market that the price would drop and you wouldn't end up making your money back. So that was really interesting. So actually the most prospective metal to mine from an asteroid is nickel. It's a semi-precious metal, but the market for it is about $30 billion a year. So if you need to make $1 billion to cover your costs and generate a return for the investors, that won't trash the price. Whereas other metals are less than $1 billion of value. You can't put $1 billion of material into the market without destroying the price and destroying your business model. So nickel is really interesting. But then you would need something like 50 to 100,000 tons of nickel, which is a lot to bring back through the atmosphere in a way that we haven't done ever before. It's just a very big mining operation. So very hard to close that. So that was a conclusion we had before we started the asteroid mining company, was that we couldn't sell to the mining industry on the Earth. We couldn't sell the metals on the Earth. So we were looking then at how do we sell to companies that wanted to use the material in space? Because when you look at the asteroid, there's enough nickel in there that 1 ton of asteroid material is worth several $1,000s just for the nickel.
Oh wow!
It's also about the same for platinum grade elements, for the platinum rubidium, like all these elements that are very similar to platinum. They're worth a lot, but the concentrations are much lower. Even in the asteroids, the concentrations are 50 times higher in the asteroids than what we mine on Earth, but 50 times higher is still only several $1,000s worth of value per ton.
Oh
if you had that on Earth, you'd be really rich. Several $1,000s per ton when it costs maybe $10 per ton to mine it. Great economics. But in an asteroid, it just costs so much to go out there and do that. So then we looked at the propellant and what that costs. And to put propellant in Earth orbit and to use it to move satellites around, that costs somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000 per kilogram. That's $10 to $100 million per ton. When we compared that to the several $1,000s per ton of contained nickel in this asteroid, the asteroid contained value of the water and hydrocarbons is $1 million per ton or more. And so there's no comparison. This is clearly the better business, except that the market doesn't exist because everybody launches it inside their satellites and rockets. So we have to create the market, but clearly there's demand if we can create it. So that's the really interesting challenge, what we're trying to crack.
And what kind of technology are you planning to use, and what processes are you planning to implement to create this?
So on the market side, creating demand for the propellant in orbit, and that's what Orbit Fab is doing. We're building tankers, and there's a graphic behind me of a tanker. That's the world's first operational fuel tanker, gas station in space. So we had to build a fueling port because there was no fueling port that existed to refuel satellites in orbit. We had to invent a docking and guidance system because there was no standard for what camera resolutions and radar systems and inter-satellite communications do you need to automate the docking. So we made a self-driving spacecraft, which is a lot like a self-driving car, but with less pedestrians around. And so we've got a fueling port, effectively satellite gas caps. We've got the self-driving satellite system. And then we're able to put together the tankers and work with the customers so they take all the right pieces on their spacecraft that we'll be able to refuel them. So those are the technical bits that we're working on.
And what kind of fuel are you planning to use for the gas station?
At the moment, satellites are using hydrazine and xenon. Hydrazine is a chemical propellant that burns with itself. It's a monopropellant. It's quite aggressive. It's also quite toxic and dangerous. So people are trying to use different propellants and get away from that. So we're also working with some other things. But right now, people are using hydrazine and xenon. Xenon's a noble gas. It doesn't burn at all. But what you can do is ionize it and then use electric charges to accelerate it. Effectively, this is an ion drive, but you still need fuel in an ion drive. Newton's laws of action and reaction. You need to have something to throw out the back if you want to move forwards. And so that's what people use xenon for. It's much more fuel efficient, but it's also much more expensive. And so that's the trade-off. But those are the two fuels people use today. Neither of those can be got from an asteroid because hydrazine needs nitrogen, and there's not a lot of nitrogen in the asteroid. And xenon is a noble gas that's not hung around in the asteroid. It's floated off into space. So what we also have to do then is whilst creating the market for these two propellants that already people have demand for, is then shift people to the new types of propellant that one day we can get from an asteroid.
How can we get people to transition to the new type of fuel?
Oh, give them something that makes business sense. Show them that there's a propellant that's just as good but is less toxic.
Well, give me a 30-second advert for people to buy into.
That's it, yeah. It's less toxic, it's just as fuel efficient, it's going to be cheaper, especially when we can bring it from the moon or asteroids. It's the future of propellants.
Amazing. And I'm interested to know about the space economy as well in regards to mining. So how will space stocks work, and how will they benefit the mining industry and companies in comparison to the stock market and mining here in terms of value?
So in terms of company values and stocks and things, it's going to be exactly the same as on Earth. There's no magical pixie dust about space. It's the problem is you can't press the reset button. You can't go up and tap it with a hammer if it's not working. And if something goes wrong, you just don't hear from it, or you get a pile of shrapnel. But apart from that, it's actually a fairly benign environment. Operating at the bottom of the ocean is possibly the worst environment. You go down, you have a very high pressures, hundreds of atmospheres of pressures. In space, you've got vacuum. It's like -1 atmosphere of pressure. At the bottom of the ocean, you've got a conductive fluid that's trying to corrode you. You've got animals that are trying to eat you. it's variously very hot or very cold. There are a lot of things going on in space. You're isolated from all of that. The problem is there's no reset button if you get it wrong. So it's unforgiving, but not hard for the technology. But for the business, the way that we do business, the stocks and trading and valuations and everything else, that's going to be exactly the same. There's no difference between a space business and an earthbound business. It needs to make money. It needs to have customers. It needs to have products. It needs to operate like just any other business.
I'm interested to know how quickly you achieved your success as an entrepreneur. Like, what are the key ingredients or the factors to ensure the success of a company, and for you specifically, what you've achieved in the space industry? It's just so inspiring, and I think it's important to ask you that question.
Oh gosh, what are the ingredients of success? How many hours do we have? I think that the most important one is failure. The most important one is to realize that if we knew the answers, people would be doing it already. If this was easy, there'd be 100 people working on this. There'd be 100 people already having solved the problem. But it's because the problems are somewhat intractable. It's because they're hard that the market doesn't exist, and we're not exactly sure which way to go and which solutions to build. And the only real way that you can know what is going to work is to go into the future and look back and see what's happened. And so, and this is one thing. This is why I'm in Silicon Valley now. Silicon Valley it's accustomed to trying lots of things and letting some of them fail. In fact, letting most of them fail. And that appears to be the most efficient way to find out what's going to work. And so, my career has embodied that somewhat. You mentioned in the intro, I've started something like 15 companies. Now that included, consulting companies when I was just working for other people, or not-for-profits and things like that. But four serious startups. None of them have been extremely successful. Some of them have done okay. But from the measures of building a large, successful company, no, this is now my fourth attempt, and this one's going fantastically, and it may not go beyond tomorrow. It's an exercise in making mistakes, hopefully not the mistakes that kill the company, but it's all about just going out there and trying things, and that's how we make progress. The great thing about Silicon Valley, they embrace that process. So there's a lot of people trying things knowing that most of them won't succeed, but those that do succeed can end up changing the world, or in our case, other worlds.
I love that. That's amazing. So why is space mining important to think about today? Why? Why is it important? Why is it necessary? Why is it needed?
Well, I look at why is it necessary and why is it needed from, first of all, the existential question of what is it to be human? And we've always wanted to adventure and go over the hill, and that's it's in our DNA, and that's because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have survived, right? As a species, we need to be going and exploring and creating new horizons, and that's what works. And so at one level, I see it as go and explore or fade into oblivion. And I don't want humanity to fade into oblivion. So that's why we do it. Another way to look at that is, why haven't we done it yet? And that's because we've passed some technology thresholds in terms of the self-driving satellite, the autonomous rendezvous and docking. That's a threshold that's passed. There's been a big uptick in the commercial space industry, and so everyone is now looking for ways they can reduce costs, which includes, buying their fuel in orbit rather than having to pay for all of it up front. So it's got a lot of business advantages. So that's one reason as well. There's a lot of different ways to answer the question of why do we do this and why do we do it now.
Well, how can we get people excited about it?
Oh, what was the great phrase about the oceans? If you want people to explore the oceans, don't put them on a ship and send them away. Inspire them with the majesty of the ocean, and they will go themselves.
That's beautiful. So that's exactly what you're doing. You're paving the way.
And the good thing, I go back, it's in our genes, right? We are predisposed to go and adventure and to see beyond the horizon. And that's what this is, right? I want to experience what it's like in space. Most people do it partly just because it's weird, because it's new, because it hasn't been done before. And
Where would you go to start the mining? Where would you go to start this new adventure?
oh well, I looked at it and said, well, we need technology, and got my engineering degree and started working on that, and then realized that I needed to know how to run a business, so I started doing that. But we need people who are working on all the different aspects to make this a reality. I think it's about creating that first permanent job in space, because it's the jobs that allow people to live where they live. And so you need to have like an export job. Think of the most hospitable environments on Earth that people live in. They live there because they can get a job there. And then they bring their families, and then maybe an internal economy that starts up. But it all starts with being able to make a living. And so once you've got that, and especially if you're making profit and other people can see that you're making profit, they will pile in as well. And then you can get an exponential growth of that activity and that economy. So yeah, anything that contributes and is able to find a way to make profits in space in a way that can support and requires humans in the loop as part of that business model, those are the things that really excite me. And that takes people from all walks of life to find these opportunities.
You've been working towards creating the first job in space. Where are you with that now? And what can you do, or what are you doing already to ensure that we achieve this sooner rather than later? Because it is important to start expanding beyond orbit.
So 25 years ago, when I was at university, my list of industries that could pay for the first permanent job in space, that might be able to justify that cost and require that human presence, was only two: tourism and mining. Since then, I've added in-space manufacturing, entertainment content. Tom Cruise wants to shoot a movie in space. That's really interesting. Mm-hmm. And you know, while I'd love to watch the movie, what I'm really excited about is if there's movies, sports, other entertainment that's created, that then can justify having somebody permanently in space to support those activities. So right now, I think that the mining, a lot of that is going to happen robotically. But once you start to look at tourism and entertainment, there's no way you can do that without people. Somebody shows up for a holiday, they're going to want the red carpet rolled out, they're going to want the door open, they're going to want the toilets cleaned, they're going to want to be shown how to move and be entertained. You're going to want people there for that. You can't do that with robots in any reasonable way.
But what skills would that person require for their role to be sustainable in space? To be profitable for you, for them to be able to execute their role in the best way possible?
So if you look at tourism as the most likely first permanent job in space, that person has to be the butler, the plumber, the electrician, the chef, the exercise coach, the tour guide. They're going to have to be everything. There's no job description that fits that very well. If we look at some of the other stuff, the entertainment creation, content creation, they're going to have to be, well, very much like you. They're going to have to know how to run a camera and sound and lighting and make an entertaining story on the spot when things don't go right and recover from that, but also all the logistics behind it. Have they got the computer systems running correctly? Have they built out the environment? What else do you need to run entertainment? Is the sound in the venue working if you're running a concert in space? All these types of things that are really going to matter. And then making sure that the space station doesn't fall out of the sky. Does the communications happen? Is the plumbing working? Can everybody get fed? The talent comes up to do their show. Are they happy and able to perform? All these types of things. That may be the first job in space.
Does that person exist?
Oh, I'm sure they do. You put people in a challenging environment and let them rise to the occasion.
They need to create some sort of a university to breed this type of astronaut.
Well, thankfully, what will happen is when we've got the first permanent job in space, we won't want to bring that person back because it's expensive to transport them to space and what have you. Like, we want it to be a permanent job, and so if this was my company and I was hiring you to go to space, I'd want you to stay there as long as possible because that saves me money. So maybe I can get you to go the first year because it's interesting and I don't have to pay you much. And the second year, I'll give you a big bonus if you stay. And the third year, even more. Pretty soon, I've got to keep you happy to keep you from wanting to and demanding to come back home. So I'll probably actually send two people as long as you stay more than twice as long, right? And you can keep each other happy. And we'll
And
start
how would we
making sure
keep each other happy?
Pardon?
How would these two people keep each other happy?
Oh, people find a way.
Sorry. It's good to laugh, Daniel. It's good to laugh. Okay. What would a typical day in space look like for this role?
Oh gosh, a typical day in space. Let's see. You wake up and you float out of your sleeping bag, and there's probably a list of things to go and fix and check. There might be a small air leak you've got to track down. Maybe the plumbing is acting up. Somebody's arriving that day, so you've got to make sure that you're there to greet them when they come through the airlock, and give them a tour and show them around. You've got to unpack and repack all of the things that came up and make sure it's organized. You've got to talk to the ground and make sure that the people who are organizing the schedules are all happy. And then, depending on what the role is, you've actually got to do the day job and entertain the person or organize the photo shoot or whatever that happens to be, and then make sure everybody's getting fed and everything else. It's a job of just taking care of things constantly and crossing over between the human skills and the technical skills.
I know this job. So I'm actually a speaker, and I go on, as a speaker, I get to go on all kinds of cruises around the world. And in exchange, I get like luxury VIP cruise experience.
Oh, wow, I'm jealous.
And I get to bring a guest. And on these cruises, I'm always taken care of by the entertainment manager, and that's their job. They have to do exactly what you described, but on ships. So, or the cruise director, or the head of entertainment. So that job exists already, but within cruise lines. So it's really interesting. You just described the role, and I've experienced it already, but on Earth and on the oceans. Isn't that fascinating? Really, really interesting.
Yeah. The first person will have to do that and all the plumbing and electricals and everything else. When we have more than one person, we end up with this internal economy. We get specialization. So someone will be specifically the technician, the mechanic, plumber, electrician who's there to keep the station running. Someone will specifically be there to grow the food, right? We'll have a farmer who's got hydroponics and what have you to grow your lettuce and tomatoes so that life is interesting and that people are happy. All of those will be sort of internal economy jobs that come once we have these export jobs where exporting entertainment and or tourism or whatever it is from space. So I think that's where it will evolve. That very first one, though, that very first person, they have to do everything because they're possibly the only person up there that is staying there on top of it. So but we need to cross that threshold. Once you have one person and they start to figure that out, they'll find other ways to make life easier, to do things that have value, make a bit more money, and all that type of thing. We need to cross that threshold where now we don't know much about how to work in space and everything. We need to work it out. We need to figure it out. And that's exciting. It's likely to happen in the next 10 years as well. Like that first permanent job in space is going to happen this decade.
To get people excited about a job like this, you would need to create the excitement, and that needs to grow and develop and reach not just people within the space industry, but I believe it needs to be across industries. You know, all kinds of people need to get excited about space, because what I've noticed is there's only, the space community is actually quite small. It's like I'm in the adventure community, and it's quite small. So you need to expand your horizons and the way you think and the decisions that you make, and collaborate with the entire world. All kinds of people should be interested about something like this, because all kinds of skills are needed, and it's not limited within the space industry. What do
Yeah,
you
what
think
I've heard
about
is that most people are interested in it. They may not be actively interested in it, but they're at least passively interested in it. They're curious, and I was told once that it's universal. Children are interested in dinosaurs and space.
that?
Adults
I
are
had a dream
interested
about
in.
a dinosaur the other night. So what?
Some of us are still interested in dinosaurs and space. But then adults are interested in sex and space. So at least space is universal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, exactly that. Um, sorry, you make me laugh.
Now you're thinking about dinosaur sex in space. Don't do that.
How are you planning to interlink these companies in space? So you have Space Arena, which will be the entertainment side of things and the space tourism, and you have Deep Space Industries and Orbit Fab as well. So will they help each other, these companies, or will they be their standalone um, uh, units in space?
Well, it's an ecosystem of companies. Each one is doing a part of that sort of in space economy, and there's a lot of other companies that are building the parts that we need as well. So before starting Orbit Fab, I looked at 4 or 5 different business models, and you mentioned Space Arena. The intention there was to organize the first Olympic scale sporting event in space. And that was a real entertainment content play. I think that one has huge potential, but at the time it was a bit early. And also, I don't have the background of selling entertainment content. I think you'd do much better at running that company. Whereas Orbit Fab, the gas stations in space, that was much closer to what I knew as my technical background and things like that. There's an easier company for me to get stuck into and build. But yeah, maybe one day I'll come back to Space Arena if nobody else is organizing massive sporting events yet in space. I'm definitely interested in doing that. And when I do, I'd like to think about how you would organize a swimming competition. You can swim in space in a bubble of water that's just floating there. And in fact, you could blow a bubble of air inside the bubble of water and have your swimming competitions in that. But where will you get the water? Well, you can rent the water from Orbit Fab.
But how would that water in space and in zero gravity affect the body?
If you don't find air, you'll drown. But otherwise, you'll float in it. It's just water, but it just doesn't sink. That's the thing, and so it's really interesting. It won't drain away. If you tried to come out of the water in zero gravity, surface tension is the strongest force. So a lot of the water will just follow you. It'll float with you. In fact, it's really hard to wipe water away from your face because it just wants to be on all the surfaces and it will crawl back. It's actually very dangerous to have water in space because it'll like stop you getting to the air and you can't breathe. So yeah, it's a lot more challenging than it first sounds. So the romance of a big floating bubble in space that you can just drift through is it's really cool.
How did you come up with all these ideas, and how are you so excited about all these ideas that the world is not yet ready for?
Oh,
Because you're someone from the future. Do you know that you're a time traveler? No, literally, you are a time traveler. How? Like, what goes on inside your brain, Daniel?
Oh, it's probably because my parents, my mum's a scientist, my dad's an engineer, and they had a wall of science fiction. And so I read all of that science fiction when I was young. That probably had a lot to do with it. I then learned how to hack the university, so the library catalog system. And I could get through to the internet, which was fun, but I also found that I could order all of the science fiction books from all over the state and get them sent to my library. So I then read through most of the science fiction in Tasmania. And yeah, I took all these ideas, and some of them just made so much sense. Some of them were weird and far out because it's science fiction. But when I sort of got into the industry, I saw that a lot of this was possible, and a lot of people have been thinking about and working on it. What didn't exist was a way to thread it together and make it a viable business. And that took me, I mean, I'm 25 years into this now. It's taken me a couple of decades to figure out how to make a business to bootstrap these types of technologies. And so I obsess about things like minimum viable product and capital efficiency and these types of sort of startup ideas, trying to get from 0 to 1, right? Where things don't exist, how do you create the first one of them that then can set off a whole industry? So that's become my obsession now, is to find these. And so I keep exploring them. Is it tourism? Is it space-based solar power? Is it manufacturing semiconductors in a weightless environment where you get no defects on the inside? So I'm a hoarder and a collector of ideas and concepts like this, and I obsess about trying to put them together in ways that make viable businesses.
Oh, so interesting. What are you going to do with all those asteroids that you collect?
Well, firstly, get the water and hydrocarbons out of them, turn them into propellants, and sell them in Earth orbit. And then sell the water to someone who wants a swimming pool, and the air to someone who wants to breathe. Breathing is good. And so, yeah, we'll do that. Then we'll take the metals and 3D print them into big structures. And the future that I see is not like humanity doesn't really belong long term on the surface of planets. It's a very limiting environment. I mean, it's great. It's nice to have air that sticks here by gravity and things like that. But our future is in free space. There's enough material in the asteroids to support 1 trillion people. There's so much material in the asteroids, it's mind-boggling, and it's floating around in free space. We don't even have to lift it out of a gravity well. And so just big habitats circling the sun with billions of people in them, that's what I see as humanity's future. And so that's going to need all that material, right? We've got to learn how to make those structures out of the asteroids, basically.
Tell us about the materials that exist within asteroids, and how they can actually help create that reality that you're talking about. So I've been studying the origins of the universe this week.
Oh, fantastic.
So what I want to know is the unexplainable physics that created the entire universe, that astrophysicists cannot explain, because that excites me. I want to know what that is. When something becomes unknown and a mystery, I just want to know more about it. I'm just so curious. But essentially, the first element that was created was hydrogen. So it's interesting that you'd be using that as a fuel, and then the rest of the periodic table, including the planets in the solar system and us. So it's interesting that you say that we would survive from all the minerals and materials from an asteroid, because it's still that is Big Bang material, is it not? And if so,
yeah.
How do you envision that to happen?
Yeah, we're all made out of star stuff. We're all made out of originally the hydrogen that formed from the Big Bang, but then inside stars, there were all the conditions to sort of slam the hydrogen together and make all the other elements, and then the stars exploded and seeded the universe with metals and silicon and carbon and oxygen and all the things that make us. So the Earth, though, formed when the sun was already lit, right? And the gravity caused the fusion of the sun to start. And what it did, it pushed out all of the light elements. So most of the hydrogen that's not in the sun is pushed out to the outer solar system. And a lot of the nitrogen, because it forms into molecules, got pushed out. And so what was left in the inner solar system was just the rocks, just the metals and some of the silicates and things. And then the things like water had to come back in the form of comets, which occasionally would come through. And so as you look at what's in the asteroids are some of the very original material, minus some of the lighter things that got blown away by the solar wind. And so what we see there is a lot of silicates. There's oxygen bonded into those material. There's metals. There's basically everything that we have on Earth, but slightly different ratios because of those processes. Did the light things get blown away, whereas Earth still had enough gravity eventually to keep hold of them? Some of them are just big metal asteroids because they were formed from protoplanets, like small Earths that were slowly sort of forming from all these impacts, and then a big impact shattered them. And what you're seeing is the core of the planet is a pure metal iron blob, right? This enormous, just pure natural stainless steel floating around the sun, tens of kilometers across. These things are enormous. They've got more metal in this, like the smallest ones, like a couple of kilometers across. It's more metal than we've ever mined out of the surface of the Earth in one of these near-Earth asteroids. And there are thousands of them. This is where there's just so much material. So, yeah, there's a huge range of asteroids. It's got everything in it that we need to build all the places we want to live and keep us alive and happy.
How is the mining of an asteroid feasible? I mean, how do you catch it? And then how do you mine it? I'm just trying to imagine.
We're trying to figure that out. The right answer is probably we've got to try 100 different ways and fail 99 or 98 of them.
Can I have a go?
Only we've done that, we'll know which ones work.
Can I have a go? Okay.
The answer to that is yes, but you have to convince somebody to give you the money first.
Oh no, I'm going to help you. I'm here to help. So.
Oh, great. Excellent.
See what comes to me.
Excellent. I'll give you a one-way ticket to an asteroid and you can tell me whether it works.
I don't know if I'd be able to survive on my own.
All of a sudden, people get less interested when I suggest that.
So I'm thinking we build a spacecraft that we send a spacecraft. We build two spacecrafts, and then we send them to an asteroid. So one has all the supplies for survival, etc. And the other one is our spaceship, and maybe another one with all the mining materials and stuff. And then we have one in orbit that finds the asteroid where the mining is being done by the people, and it gathers the material so that it takes the weight off the asteroid. And then it brings it back down to Earth or another station or post where all this material from the mining is gathered and compiled and then, etc., turned into the business. But it would be almost like, think about a magic carpet. Instead of a magic floating carpet in space, you have this asteroid. So you have to almost glorify it and make this asteroid look like an exciting place to live and work on. And then when you do that, you'll offer the person everything they need, all those spacecrafts, maybe even a team, maybe a very small team, live and work on this asteroid and mine it. What do you think? Do you like my idea?
I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we get to see something like this happen through your endeavors. Yeah, it's really exciting. Right. The other question I wanted to ask you was, you've worked across the globe. You've worked in many countries, and originally you're from Tasmania. How do you think it's different in other countries compared to the US?
Wow, yeah, where do I start with that question? How is space activities different in Australia? In Australia, there were no space activities. When I did my undergraduate degree, there was basically nothing happening in Australia, which is what made me realize I had to become an entrepreneur and I had to start companies and do this myself. There was no space agency. There were no big aerospace companies. There was nobody saying, we have the plan and all you have to do is follow it. So I realized that if I wanted to do this, I would have to make the plan myself. And sort of step one was to learn how to build spacecraft. So I went to Canada and then Europe and the US, building spacecraft, and in the process starting companies and learning a lot of things and meeting a lot of interesting people who were traveling a similar journey in different ways. So what I saw, Australia now has a space agency, which is nice. It's not very big, but it's a great start. There are now a few small companies there that are getting off the ground. One of the big things that's changed in the last 20, 25 years that I've been in this industry, there are a lot more commercial companies now. There are a lot more entrepreneurial companies. that are trying to find new business models and have been quite successful at that. So it used to be much more dominated by governments, and now people can see that the future of the industry is going to be written by the companies that are trying to find profits and new things to do and move fast and create that future that they want to see come to pass. That's happening now in the private sector and in the startup companies and things like that. And honestly, the US is still the best company in the world, and Silicon Valley is still the hub of that type of innovation, of creating new companies, of trying them, of letting the ones that don't work pass into history and doubling down on the ones that are successful. That entrepreneurial attitude in the US is what is really driving this and putting the US at the front of this game right now. Europe has a somewhat different approach, a lot more government driven, and they tend to be good followers once something is proven out. And then there's a lot of countries that are still sort of standing there looking on because they haven't got the risk appetite, or they haven't got the capital to put into it, or the background in the space industry. So yeah, from my perspective, the US is the place to be right now, and that's sort of backed up by how many startups and where the money is going. But it's still a global endeavor. There are definitely things happening all over the world.
Amazing, and that's why I'm coming to the US. Okay, right. Thank you so much, Daniel. It's been so interesting.
This has been fun.
And fun, yeah, fun. I'm really excited to see your space endeavors. Well, the launch for the gas station will be in, you said, 2 months?
Yeah. Currently scheduled for June.
June, amazing. And the asteroid, see if you can figure that out, see if you can make that happen. Find an asteroid through a satellite or the telescope or both, and just locate it and then plan your expedition there. It's almost like planning an adventure, you choose a place on the map. Sometimes I roll my dice and see where it lands, and then I think you're an explorer. You're literally a space explorer, and then just plan the expedition, find possibilities and solutions instead of problems. Find the solutions. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, that's how it's done. The rest is just details.
Exactly. Details. Super easy. It's not rocket science, is it? Only a bit.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. And I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will speak to you soon.
Thanks, Sarah. Great chatting, and I hope that your adventures take you to space one day.
They will.
Excellent.